Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer where we're diving into the incredibly fascinating and honestly kind of paradoxical life of Hephaestus. You know, when most people hear that name, they just picture this sweaty blacksmith of the gods hammering away at an anvil. But today, we're looking way beyond that tired trope. We're gonna uncover a story filled with deep trauma, really cunning revenge, and, well, what we can literally only describe as ancient science fiction. Let's get right into it.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at his birth and divine rejection, then his exile and his vengeful return. After that, we're diving into his messy marriage, infidelity, and offspring. Then comes the really fun stuff, his masterworks and ancient automata, and finally we'll wrap up with the paradox of Techne.
Section 1. Birth and Divine Rejection, the Outcast of Olympus.
Right from the jump, Hephaestus is defined by a deep wound, a traumatic birth, and a pretty violent rejection. It's fascinating because the conflicting myths really highlight his immediate status as this marginalized outsider. In one version of the story, Hera has him all by herself as payback against Zeus for birthing Athena, but then she literally throws him out because he's born with physical deformities. Rough, right? But in another version, he's the son of both Zeus and Hera, and Zeus hurls him from the heavens just for trying to protect his mom during an argument. Either way, the guy's story begins with a brutal eviction. Imagine this. He falls from the heavens, and that terrifying descent lasts an entire day before he violently crashes onto the island of Lemnos, or maybe into the sea right nearby. Luckily, he's rescued by these sea nymphs, Thetis and Eurynome. So, hidden away from the incredibly cruel eyes of Olympus, he's fostered by the local Scythian tribe. And it's actually here, in this secret exile, that he sets up his very first forge and begins honing his absolute genius of a craft.
You see, his physical disability wasn't just a minor detail. It was a central, defining feature of his identity back in antiquity. Homer even explicitly calls him the god of the dragging footsteps. His divinity didn't miraculously heal him. Instead, his physical brokenness stood in this really stark contrast to the perfect, imperishable, starry bronze home that he built for himself.
Which brings us to Section 2, Exile and Vengeful Return. An incredibly cunning trap. So, how does the discarded son get payback? Not with a sword, but with sheer, brilliant cunning. He builds this magnificent golden throne and sends it up to Mount Olympus as a gift for his mother, Hera. But the second she sits down, snap, invisible chains clamp around her, suspending her right in midair. The gods are freaking out, begging him to release her, and he is just like, no way. It actually isn't until Dionysus, the wine god, gets him completely intoxicated that Hephaestus finally agrees to come back. And he doesn't ride in on a glorious chariot. He rides back into Olympus on the back of a mule, forcing the entire pantheon to basically beg for the return of the very son they threw out like trash. It is absolutely the ultimate underdog victory.
And the secret to that inescapable trap? Adamantine. By mastering mythological, literally unbreakable materials like this, he proved a massive point. His intellect, his engineering, it was infinitely more powerful than the brute strength of the Olympians. He didn't have to overpower the gods, he just out-engineered them.
All right, Section 3, Marriage, Infidelity, and Offspring. Love, Traps, and Legacy. As a sort of bribe for finally letting Hera go, Hephaestus is given the most beautiful goddess of all, Aphrodite, to be his wife. But it wasn't exactly a happy marriage. She's unfaithful, having this super-secret affair with Ares, the actual god of war. Now, when the sun god Helios tips Hephaestus off about this, he doesn't try to challenge Ares to a fistfight, because obviously that's a bad idea. Instead, he goes to his forge. He crafts a net of bronze so fine it's gossamer light and totally invisible, like a spider's web. He rigs it above his bed, and when Aphrodite and Ares meet up, bam, the trap springs. It locks the two lovers in an unbreakable embrace, and Hephaestus just invites all the other gods over to point and laugh. This infamous love triangle has had such a massive, enduring legacy, especially when it gets translated into their Roman equivalents, Vulcan, Venus, and Mars. But the takeaway here is the exact same. Even though he was completely betrayed, his technological superiority once again totally humiliated the physically perfect gods. Now, even though his marriage to Aphrodite didn't produce any kids, his legacy absolutely continued. He had this really unusual lineage of offspring with various nymphs and mortals. He fathered the Kabiri, who were these metalworking gods of Lemnos, and the Polici, gods of the geysers down in Sicily. But his most famous, and definitely his strangest offspring, connects him directly to the foundational myths of Athens. I'm talking about a child named Erichthonius. Okay, the origin story of Erichthonius is wild. So Hephaestus develops this massive crush on the virgin goddess Athena. He pursues her, she completely rejects him and fights him off, which causes his seed to fall onto her leg. Disgusted, she wipes it off with a piece of wool and throws it on the ground. Well, that seed fertilizes Gaia, the earth itself, and out pops Erichthonius, an infant who's often depicted with snake-like features. Athena actually raises him in secret, and he goes on to become a foundational king of Athens. This bizarre origin became a hugely important political symbol for the Athenians, basically proving they were indigenous, children of the soil, born right out of the earth.
Moving on to Section 4, Masterworks and Ancient Automata, or as I like to call it, Ancient Sci-Fi.
Think about this. Long before we had modern robotics or artificial intelligence, the ancient Greeks were already conceptualizing intelligent machines made by a divine hand. They called these automata. Hephaestus wasn't just hammering out standard swords and shields. The guy was literally breathing artificial life into metal.
Just look at this sci-fi roster. These aren't just weapons, they are marvels of ancient science fiction. He builds Talos, this towering bronze giant robot that patrols and guards the island of Crete. He forges these golden maidens that actually have intelligence and voices to help him around his workshop. He makes literal fire-breathing brass bowls for King Aeetes. Ancient sources even talk about the eagle that eats Prometheus's liver every day, saying it was actually a bronze, drone-like raptor built on Zeus's orders. Oh, and famously, he molds Pandora, the very first woman, out of raw clay. She's essentially a mythological android.
It's such a poignant juxtaposition, isn't it? On one hand, you have the creator, Hephaestus. He suffers, he has a limp, he was literally thrown out of heaven. But on the other hand, his creations, they're flawless, they're invisible, they're divine. He essentially compensated for his own bodily suffering by birthing absolute mechanical perfection.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the Paradox of Techne, Crafting Human Progress.
You know, the Homeric hymn to Hephaestus shows us that he wasn't just revered as a guy who made things, he was an essential educator. Alongside Athena, his techne, his craft and skill, literally elevated humanity out of the brutal wilderness. Before his teachings, humans were living in caves, like beasts. He is the one who taught us how to build, how to forge, how to basically create civilization itself. But there's this massive cultural paradox here, the coexistence of marginalization and essentiality. And this perfectly mirrors the actual social conditions of the ancient world. Back then, heavy physical labor like metalworking was often done by folks with physical disabilities who maybe couldn't participate in traditional farming or warfare. Society entirely relied on them for survival, even while simultaneously marginalizing them. That dual reality cements Hephaestus as the ultimate paradox of the Greek pantheon. Think about it. He was the ultimate outsider, yet he literally built the golden, starry palaces for the insiders. He made the chariots they rode in, the thrones they sat on, the weapons they fought their wars with. The other gods looked down on him, but they literally could not function without him. So I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Hephaestus took his brutal rejection and transformed it into unparalleled creation. The exact god who was thrown out of heaven ended up building the infrastructure of the gods and the entire foundation of human progress. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If the god of the forge was physically broken, does it mean our greatest progress actually comes from our deepest wounds? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope you found this deep dive as absolutely fascinating as I do.